Alright, hi everyone. My name is Spencer Klink. I'm a sophomore on the team, and this is going to be my lecture on a spending dissad, which is an assignment that I worked on with Jonathan Cosgrove, a freshman on the team, and Landon Poon. So if you have any questions, you can consult any three of us about this argument, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. So just an overview to what the argument says. The main idea is that national service is too expensive. The 1EC expands the program, which hurts the economy because it will cost way too much, and that will push the economy over the brink and will lead to extinction because people like Donald Trump will lash out and not know what to do in the face of an economic disaster. So that was essentially the negative argument, but here I'll go into more depth about the uniqueness and then the links and internal links and then the impact. So the uniqueness says what is happening in the status quo with the economy. It argues that the economy isn't doing so well. Government spending is really high right now, the debt has been growing, and things are especially unstable for the economy to go over the brink now. We're just before the time of a great economic downfall, which means that the way the US acts and what sort of policies they take will definitely affect what was going to happen to the economy. The next argument are the links, and so something that you'll have to pay attention to is what the affirmative is talking about. So if the 1EC is all about things like civil service, so for example, Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or other programs like that that aren't the military, then you have to read a different argument than what you would against the draft. So first, if they read a draft, there's the Putvara evidence, which is pretty good. It says that the draft is bad for the economy for three reasons. First is that it takes people out of the workforce for the long term, which means that it hurts the private sector and it hurts private companies that aren't associated with the government. The second is that it leads to more reckless warfare, so there is an increase in the amount of soldiers, which will cost money since they don't really know what they're doing and they are inexperienced, which means that it causes a lot of damage. And then the third argument is very simple. It's just that the program isn't necessarily a cheap thing to maintain. So there are a ton of things that contribute to its cost. So not only does the program have to be created and more people have to go into the military, but there also has to be an increase in resources for them to ensure that they are working in safe conditions, for example, or that they're able to participate without causing a ton of harm to them. So that could take a number of forms. So they need a bunch of food to be supplied to them. There's also a lot of medical stuff that needs to go into that. And so there's just kind of a laundry list of things that the government has to pay attention to and fund for the military draft. The next argument is for civil service, and that's the Chapman evidence. However, it works for both. So this says, similar to the military one, that tons of money has to go into the compulsory system. This card is very good on this. At the very top of the evidence, you'll see it provides a whole list of things that that the program will have to create in terms of not only direct things that have to go into it, but also indirect things, which you should look at the evidence after in the spending dissad file, and it'll outline that for you. But the next argument is similar to the Putvara one, but it's a labor shortage, and the only difference between the Putvara and Chapman evidence is that the Chapman card is meant to directly indict more than just the draft. It goes a step further and says that compulsory AmeriCorps or other programs would be bad, which means that you can definitely read the Chapman evidence against an act that defends the military, but the Putvara evidence gets really specific to a draft and what it does, which is why I think that having the two different pieces of evidence would be good. Next is the internal link. It says that increased spending is a bad thing for the economy. This argument is pretty intuitive, but the card goes into depth about why that is true. So it provides a Canada example where in the 1990s, their economy was not doing well. The country slushed a bunch of things that were hiking up their budget and increasing their debt, and that helped them get out of the economic turmoil they were facing, which means that increasing debt would obviously not be good. But next is that decreasing spending would allow for growth in the private sector. And otherwise, if there is none of that, then it means that private companies are going to get hurt, and then they are going to be unable to contribute to the economy. So it's a question of what approach do they take, and this evidence says that anything that increases spending of a public program, i.e. a program created by the government, is going to be one that trades off with effective work that is happening outside of the government, so by individuals or corporations or other things. And then finally, there's the impact. There are a ton of other ones to read, but the diversionary war one is very simple and it's very easy to explain, so I'll be talking about that one. It's also probably my favorite one. This argument is that if there is a bad economic condition in the US, people like Donald Trump, who don't really have experience in that type of situation and are not the most rational of actors, will lash out as a result and try to divert attention away from economic problems by starting a war to distract away from the bad economy. Then the argument would also say that there is nuclear war. So if there's decline, leaders become irrational and start to use force. And the next one is that there's a hegemony impact too, which is that vulnerability with the U.S. economy sees control over to other countries. They lose influence in those regions. Other countries that are power hungry see that there is lack of stability in the U.S. and then they attack us. So again, I think that the diversionary one is particularly good on this issue. And I think that it's particularly compelling too because if there really is a bad economic downfall, as all of the NC's evidence would say, then Trump would definitely lash out with something really big and really bad, for example, nuclear weapons. And the diversionary war one also is strategic because you don't have to win necessarily, that you only have to win that people like Donald Trump don't really know what they're doing and that they're going to do something crazy like a lash out as a result of a failing economy. And so I think that one's strategic. So now we're getting into the 1AR responses. So if you are affirming, then these are the arguments that you would read if you're defending the civil-military relations act that we have written. So there are a couple of responses. So first on the uniqueness is that the funding from things like a national service program aren't going to be that big compared to other losses in funding. So, for example, there's a huge nuclear arsenal boost that's coming right now. That's definitely not going to be good. But also just intuitively, the debt clock is at 18 trillion or something crazy, which just shows that there are obviously way more egregious things contributing to our debt. That obviously the minor loss of money that national service would cause wouldn't be that big. And then the third argument is that the U.S. economy isn't in a condition where it's going to collapse. There's at least enough stability where it's able to survive any sort of policy like the one the affirmative is talking about. This argument doesn't say that the economy is doing amazing or anything like that, but it says that it's not going to completely fall out and then people like Trump aren't going to be super crazy and be able to start a nuclear war. The evidence doesn't specifically indict diversionary war stuff, but that's an extrapolation you can make from that, I guess. Next is the links. So there are a lot of answers that you can read on the links. So first is that the current military have, which relies on a voluntary force, is way too expensive. So all of the AC solvency talks about how there's lots of war occurring as a result. That's definitely not something that is cheap for the US because we have to keep funneling money into things like into wars against other places that we don't need to be having and that aren't doing anything for us. The current military also relies on incentives to get others to join, which definitely wouldn't cheap because it amounts to providing stipends and cash for people who join the military, whereas the draft would just force them to go in, so there's no financial compensation that they have to be given. The second is an individual card that's saying that the huge amount of war that we are seeing is hurting the economy. So this would tie in well with the second advantage that you're reading, talking about how we make military operations more effective. The evidence says that if the U.S. fights a ton of wars and shovels tons of money into that, then obviously that's really bad for the economy. So the AF would be doing something that helps economic growth. And then the final argument is that the draft benefits the economy. And it says that it preserves work for experienced workers in non-government institutions and corporations, etc., instead of taking their jobs, which would mean that it's in fact improving the private sector and it's helping them out. So that would be a good thing. And then finally, there's the impact. You could definitely read an impact turn against this that we have, and that's the Fleming 826 argument. It says that spending helps the government in a poor economic condition. It cites a UC Berkeley study and a ton of other papers that have also studied up on it to validate this claim too. And it's just basically if there's an increase in spending, that's able to help the government come out of a time of economic downfall. And I think that this is definitely a strong argument to read. The card is definitely backed up by a lot of empirical analysis, which is good. But I think that it just depends on what situation you're in, what type of arguments you would want to read, and what you think would be most strategic. And so I think that with that in mind, that is what the spending argument talks about, and that is what our answers are to it. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to talk to Jonathan or Landon or me. We'd all be happy to help out and explain it. And I'm sure that any other varsity member or coach would also be able to explain the argument and teach you about it a bit more. So thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful. See you guys around.